Welcome to the Law Firm AI and Scaling Playbook. It's your host, Jamie Stewart, and with me today is Ron Geffner of Sadis Goldberg. Welcome, Ron.
Thanks for having me, Jamie. I'm excited to be here.
Very excited to have you. And I saw online that you're part of the #3 law firm for hedge funds.
That's correct. We're ranked consistently in the top 5 by a database Preqin, but our firm focuses on all forms of private funds. On average, we launch about 60 to 80 hedge, private equity, venture capital, real estate, commodity, all forms of funds. And our clients are located globally. So it makes for a very interesting life experience, not only from learning different perspectives outside just the American perspective, but also seeing all forms of asset managers, some with traditional experience, but also biotech and healthcare and a range of other things. So we'll have former lawyers, former doctors, former politicians. These are people that believe they see trends before they become mainstream. I know you're focused on AI. The old world of working with your father's accountant or your father's lawyer or your mother's accountant or mother's lawyer seems to be less and less. There's two dynamics I've seen occur. It's more reputational strength, and you did work with so, and he or she's a good friend of mine. By having trust for my friend, and you've worked with my friend, I now have trust for you. And unfortunately, there's less and less of that seems to go on in many industries. And it's more the commoditization of services that started to occur more in 2008 with the advent of AI and the implementation of AI and the maturing of AI. I imagine that will get further eroded. And so you're seeing that there's a consumer marketplace of, I just care about cost. And to me, reputation is misplaced.
Used to be reputation and word of mouth, but yeah, that's changed. People are now on the internet and searching what's going to be the cheapest and best option.
But I'll give you a new encounter I had happen that was really interesting. I received a call from a prospective client, and he shares with me that he put parameters into ChatGPT, and ChatGPT not only specifically split out Sadis and Goldberg, one of the firms I co-founded, but specifically mentioned Ron Geffner. While on one hand, I'm suggesting there's a commoditization, AI has also benefited me personally by specifying not only my firm, but also me personally. I find that there's still interesting exceptions to the rule.
Sure. Tell me more about your journey to becoming a leader in private funds law. How did you get there?
Part of it is necessity is the mother of invention. I first founded Sadis. I was freaked out about paying my bills, no different than any other entrepreneur. I was 30 years old. I had 6-month-old twins that were home with their mom and maybe $10,000 in the bank.
No pressure, no pressure.
No pressure. And by the way, whether it's coincidental or genetic or stress-based, I was fully gray shortly thereafter, assuming there's a correlation with stress and hair color. But I started my career at the United States Securities and Exchange Commission, where I used to prosecute money managers. At the time when I started, this was pre-Madoff, there were very few lawyers that really had depth in understanding the Investment Advisors Act and the Investment Company Act, which play an active role in the asset management industry. And so the very nature of the marketplace was focused on registered investment companies, registered funds, or people registered as advisors that were taking out separately managed accounts, as well as private funds. I know one of the things we're going to talk about is what I'm seeing as far as trends in the private fund formation. The model has evolved dramatically over the last 10 years, and started to see a change in trends in 2008, and that's what's really continuing to play out. I'm going to jump back real quick to 2008 so you can understand the trend line. Pre-2008, the private fund sector was, at least in demand for who was launching products, predominantly more hedge fund structure. Private equity pre-2008 was less and less in favor due to a range of different factors. And prior to 2008, most of the people that were helping contribute portfolio capital to emerging managers were family offices and high net worth persons. We had the financial crisis occur in 2008. There's a paradigm shift to who is financing the growth in the private fund sector and also what types of products are in demand, right? A lot of different variables. So the demand shifted more towards private equity, closed-end funds, illiquid assets, due to the volatility of the public markets. At the same time, family offices and high net worth persons played less and less of a role and became more institutional capital going in. So that changes everything. So if you fast forward to today, we've seen a decline in the money that's being allocated to emerging managers. I keep reading about hedge funds and private equity funds just throwing insane amounts of capital. The number of funds being launched has dramatically decreased in the last 18 months. There were fewer deals in the M&A space, seeing that space thawing, but there's fewer exits in private equity. We've also seen the asset allocation has changed who is allocating it. So the institutional market since 2008 has grown dramatically, while the middle market and the emerging manager market has shrunk. Now, add into that, you have a lot of lawyers and non-lawyers that sit there and saying, look, there's a lot of money being made in the private fund sector that are either were involved with it and left either through their own decision, their prior employers, for no other reason than they need to pay their bills. They put out a shingle. So we've now seen a decrease in the population and an increase in the number of vendors providing the service. And there's a lack of education within the consumption of those services because it's become commoditized. So you have at the low end firms that they're not necessarily law firms that might charge $5,000 or $10,000, create documentation, which I would argue from a quality perspective is not where it should be. Well, you have other firms charging $500,000, $1 million. So it's all over the place. And many of the consumers look at it as a binary decision, which is a mistake, which leads to operational risk, reputational risk, and a range of other problems that is not really within their ability to see because they've never run a business. A lot like these law firms that are charging low price or non-law firms. They think one tax disclosure fits all, which it doesn't. What's worse is if you have a regulatory violation, that will follow you and haunt you till the days of your life end, or you're involved in civil litigation with your investors because you don't know how to manage the issues. It's secure your future. That's what we tell people.
With AI and technology coming about too, do you see that that is especially risky? I think it was 2023, the SEC came out with proposed rules restricting predictive analytics, including AI, aimed at addressing conflicts of interest. But there's just so much AI can do, and technology can help improve and streamline processes. To what extent do you see that being allowed and permitted in corporate securities law?
It's being used now. Whether it's being used now correctly or incorrectly is a case by case. One of our clients who I'm close with said to me probably 15 years ago, and at the time, probably was like in his late 20s, he's like, anything that can be replaced by technology will. So it's sat in my head. And AI is not prime time ready to draft offering documents because we've continued to look at it. I've spoken to accounting firms where they've looked at having an audit done through AI. That's not ready for prime time as well. I know in litigation for searching things and creating indices, it's helpful, but it's still like early days of Bluetooth. It's really good, but it's not a perfected technology. It will get better. But what AI does not provide people, it doesn't provide perspective. While AI is a tool, I don't see it necessarily replacing me anytime soon.
Do you think that regulators, the SEC and others too, will attempt or continue to put out rules, proposed rules to try and crack down on it, or just to try and regulate it?
So how the SEC's earlier stance was with regard to people using some disclosures of the implementation of AI as a way to help promote their firms and show they were cutting edge. And the reality was they weren't using it in the way that they were disclosing that they were using it. So it's anything that's a material misrepresentation or that might be misleading to the consumer. The SEC will always, I don't see it not always doing this, look at cases involving fraud, fraudulent misrepresentations. But technology has been used by the SEC long before AI developed. They had programs to determine what they thought was concerns involving trading involving non-public information. So that's pre-existed any of these conversations with AI, and it'll continue to. Can it replace as opposed to being used as a tool to supplement? And I think that's really what's embedded in the conversation of a lot of people. Technology is always playing a role. With regard to compliance, imagine it will continue to play more of a role, not only with regard to sorting through electronic communications and looking for buzzwords that violate the Investment Advisors Act, but a range of other things. But the one mistake I would say to people, and that's one of the things we are saying, is that people believe they have the proper skill set that are not trained to use AI to replace the work done by those people that have proper training. and they're going to market. I met a group, they repurposed a product that they used a few years ago. It had nothing to do with the strategy they're implementing now. And they don't have any U.S. lawyer tied to the product. That presents a range of issues. So by way of example, if I'm an asset manager, one of the biggest areas of risk to me is the materials I use to attract attention, like marketing materials or pitch decks. Using AI may or may not lead. I don't think it's going to lead right now to a conclusive answer that I would feel comfortable relying upon. And it's not a binary thing that once you're up and running, you're golden. Things change. We live in a dynamic world. Is AI going to push you every change? And do you know what to implement, what not to implement, and how to rank it? Law is just a variable in the business decision for an entrepreneur. I'll give you an example. One of the earliest clients we met, going back now 30 years, it was a person who went to law school, who wasn't practicing, and explained to us that they had a penalty by the IRS of $1 million for some position they took. And I'm young, so I'm like, wow, I guess you would never do that again, right? And he goes, I do it all day long, every day. Why? Because they made $5 million, even though they had $1 million liability. So that's where I go to law as a variable. Some risks are worth taking, possibly, depending on how much wealth do you have to protect. Is it a do or die thing? What's the likelihood of it being interpreted as a violation? What is the penalty? Penalty, not just economic, reputational. So law is a variable. There are people that enter into contracts all the time that may or may not be able to honor the terms of the contract, but they still enter into them for a range of reasons. They're willing to take a bet that they will be in the position they need to be in by the time the terms of their contract become due. But it happens in a lot of contracts. A personal deal you might be in where somebody's like, look, it's in your best interest to enter into this clause. Give you an example, like prior to a wedding, entering into an agreement with your significant other to be. Most people don't do that. And I'm not saying they should or shouldn't, but I'm saying it's a variable on what will that introduce into the relationship. So with regard to the private fund sector, there's just so many more variables, so much greater knowledge, and it's not parochial. It's not limited to where you physically sit or the U.S. We live in a dynamic world. Your portfolio is going to probably change over time because what worked in year 1, year 2, year 3 may no longer work. Think about the advent of tariffs that cause people to change their strategy. Think about wars that occur. Think about whether interest rates are getting cut or maintained. It's influencing how real estate markets are playing out. So law is a living, breathing thing, as is everything else, and associating yourself with somebody who enables you to read the tea leaves so that you're better positioned for your future, not your past. Because we're looking out the front windshield and not looking in the rearview mirror. It's not how you run a business. You know what? They're just a segment of the population they live in, so they're human. So some do and some don't. There's no one path for any of us. So really it's more, who are your advisors? Like, just surround yourself with people that you're going to listen to. If you're not going to listen to them or you think you're smarter than them, you've already made a bad decision.
Totally agree. Well, too, so risk management, obviously important factor in all corporate securities law. Do you think that there are risk management considerations that often get overlooked?
Every single day. Every single day. One of the mistakes that occurs in the practice of law, and we've all lived in it, is ivory tower advice versus practical guidance. In part, I think a lot of our growth has really been based upon the fact that not just myself, but also many of my partners, if not all my partners, try to bring a practical approach to the work product as well. Give you an example. If we have a client with a finite budget, which most clients have a finite budget, you want to necessarily get all the big things out of the way, but you may not be in a position to get all the limited, lower likelihood outlying events out of the way. So if you get 90% of what you want by staying budget, how important is that 10% that might have caused you to go 2x over budget? I was advising a client who didn't listen to me going back a couple of years. We were setting up a cannabis fund, and timing was everything for this fund. They had a limited window to execute on something. They chose a vendor who I advised them that vendor has no history dealing with cannabis investments. And they're a large institution, and I would be concerned that they won't support your product despite the fact they're at the table right now. Got to the 1 yard line and negotiated all the terms, and the person spent $20,000, $30,000 negotiating it. and that vendor pulled the plug and that client never launched their funds. I'm not always right, but I feel like
Sure.
I'm more right than wrong. So surround yourself with vendors where you listen to them. I have people in my life where I go to for legal services, accounting services. If I think I'm the smarter person in the room and they're idiots, I'm working with the wrong people.
We'll really appreciate you being on, Ron, and hearing your perspective and your insights. Thank you so much. If listeners want to find more out about you and Sadis and Goldberg, where should they go?
They can go to our website. My contact information is more public than a human being's contact information should be. But obviously, Ron Geffner, Sadis, and Goldberg. And we're here to help people.
Ron, thank you so much for joining us and sharing your expertise for our listeners. If you want to learn more about Ron or Sadis and Goldberg, check out the links in description down below. And as always, thanks for tuning in to the Law Firm AI and Scaling Playbook.